A flash, like a rip in reality, split the heavens. The stars shimmered and warped as something massive emerged from the void. At first, it appeared as a dark blot against the constellations, but then the lights came. Hundreds, thousands of flickering blue and red signals running along the hull of the descending behemoth. The jungle below, teeming with life, pulse in response, its creatures sensing the arrival of something unnatural. The Cril Dominion had come for Earth. Across the world, similar rifts formed. In low orbit, Earth satellites picked up the signatures of colossal warships, each spanning several miles, their hulls sleek and ridged with biomechanical plating. The Cril were an old empire, their dominion spanning thousands of worlds. Humanity, in comparison, was a mere child, a species still squabbling over borders, still limited by the fragile rules of diplomacy and ethics. They had expected this invasion. Warnings had come from deep space scans, from intercepted distress signals of other fallen worlds. And yet, when the moment arrived, Earth was still unprepared. Within the first hour, global communications were disrupted. Power grids flickered and died. An electromagnetic pulse swept across the atmosphere, grounding aircraft and silencing radar stations. The world was thrown into chaos before the first shot was even fired. Then came the bombardments. Massive plasma beams launched from the warships, striking the heart of civilization. New York, London, Beijing, Moscow. Metropolises turned to molten craters in minutes. Those who were fortunate enough to be outside the immediate impact zone still suffered as the shockwave shattered buildings, igniting everything in their path. The United Nations scrambled to mount a defense. The world's strongest military forces, NATO, Russia, China, launched a desperate counterattack. Fighter jets streaked toward the alien ships, missile salvos painting the sky with trails of smoke. But the Cril were ready. Their warships deployed shimmering energy barriers that absorbed everything thrown at them. Earth's most powerful weapons, nuclear, ballistic, and chemical, were rendered useless. Orbital drop pods rained from the sky, slamming into cities and military bases. The Cril soldiers emerged, towering figures clad in living armor that pulsed with an eerie, organic glow. Their weapons were not mere guns, but extensions of their own biology, rifles that hummed like living creatures, spitting out pulses of energy that disintegrated anything they struck. Humanity's forces crumbled. Armored divisions were shredded in seconds. Infantry lines disintegrated under the relentless barrage. For every Cril soldier that fell, 100 humans perished. By the third day, Earth's leaders had no choice. The surrender came swiftly, a desperate plea broadcast from the few remaining global communication centers. The message was simple. We yield. Do not destroy us. The Cril did not reply. They did not need to. Their warships loomed over the wreckage of Earth's greatest cities, their dominion absolute. They had conquered thousands of worlds before, and Earth was no different. Or so they thought. The last wilderness. The Amazon rainforest remained untouched, not because the Cril had spared it, but because it was irrelevant. The jungle was not a city. It held no monuments, no symbols of power, no structures of significance. It was wild, chaotic, untamed. The Cril saw no reason to waste resources conquering mere trees and rivers. Their focus was on the urban centers, the factories, the military bases, places where they could break Earth's spirit. But deep within that wilderness, beyond the reach of their scans, Earth's true resistance was waiting. Major Luis Ortega watched the burning horizon from a perch high in the jungle canopy. The distant glow of fire and destruction reflected in his dark, calculating eyes. The cities had fallen. The military had been crushed. But here, in the heart of the rainforest, the war was far from over. He adjusted the earpiece strapped to his head, listening to the whispers of his men spread across the jungle floor. Ortega, this is Ayala. We have movement along the riverbank. Looks like Cril scout units. Ortega didn't respond immediately. He exhaled slowly, his breath steady despite the weight of what had happened. The fall of Earth was something he had feared for years. He had seen the reports, studied the patterns of intergalactic warfare. The Cril had underestimated humanity, but humanity had also underestimated the Cril. Now, survival was the only option. Numbers? He asked quietly. Small unit. 4 hostiles. They are scanning the area. Ortega closed his eyes, picturing the terrain in his mind. The jungle was dense here, with towering trees draped in vines and thick undergrowth that made visibility a nightmare. A perfect hunting ground. He clicked his radio twice, an unspoken signal. The jungle fell silent. Below, his soldiers, men and women trained in jungle warfare, moved like ghosts. Faces streaked with camouflage, weapons wrapped in moss to break their outlines. They blended seamlessly into the environment. They were not conventional soldiers. They were specialists, survivalists, guerrillas, assassins trained to fight in the world's harshest conditions. And now, the Cril were about to learn what that meant. The alien squad moved cautiously through the undergrowth, their weapons scanning for heat signatures. They were powerful, but they were blind. Their technology could not differentiate between the countless sources of infrared heat in the jungle: snakes, jaguars, insects, decaying plants. The rainforest was alive in ways they couldn't comprehend. The first alien stepped into a hidden snare. A vine-wrapped noose yanked it into the air, where sharpened bamboo stakes impaled it through its chitinous armor. It let out a strangled gurgle before falling limp, its greenish-black blood dripping to the ground. The second and third turned, raising their weapons, but the jungle struck again. A blowgun dart hissed through the air, embedding itself in the exposed neck of one Cril soldier. The neurotoxin worked fast. Muscles locked, limbs seized, and the alien collapsed, spasming violently. The last Cril panicked, firing wildly into the trees. But there was nothing to shoot at. Ortega and his team had already moved, shifting through the undergrowth like shadows. A machete flashed in the dim light, slicing through alien flesh. A muffled gurgle. Another body fell. Silence returned to the jungle. Ortega wiped the blood from his blade, glancing at his men. They were already moving the bodies, stripping them for supplies, learning from their enemy. Every encounter, every kill, was a lesson. The war wasn't over. It had only just begun. The jungle was alive, but not with the usual harmony of nature. Something new had invaded its depths. The Cril, towering figures encased in living armor, moved through the dense foliage, their weapons pulsing with an eerie green light. Their movements were precise, methodical, trained for war on countless worlds. But they had never fought a war like this. Major Luis Ortega crouched behind a massive kapok tree, his breath slow and measured. Around him, his team moved like shadows, invisible to the untrained eye. They weren't an army. They weren't even a formal battalion anymore. They were something else entirely: survivors, hunters, ghosts. They were the jungle special forces. The Cril underestimated them. The invaders saw Earth's wilderness as an obstacle, a nuisance. They believed the jungle was primitive, unstructured. That arrogance had already cost them their first scouting team, and Ortega planned to make sure it cost them much more. Through his thermal scope, Ortega studied the enemy. 5 aliens, scanning the jungle with bioscanners. Their armor pulsed with a bioluminescent glow, shifting in color as they adjusted their visors, searching for heat signatures. But the jungle was filled with life: monkeys, jaguars, insects, each radiating body heat that confused the Cril's technology. Ortega glanced at Sergeant Ayala, who lay prone beside him, face streaked with mud. "We've got a pattern now," Ortega whispered. "They sweep in a grid. 3 forward, 2 in reserve." Ayala smirked. "Arrogant bastards think they own the place." "They won't for long," Ortega said. He gave the signal. The jungle strikes first. The Cril's first mistake was thinking they were the hunters. The first alien stepped into a patch of leaves that concealed a punji pit, razor-sharp bamboo stakes dipped in venom. The moment its armored foot made contact, the ground gave way. The Cril soldier howled, impaled through the torso. It tried to scramble out, but its limbs convulsed as the venom worked through its system, paralyzing it within seconds. The remaining 4 turned, raising their weapons. Their scanners flickered in confusion. The second alien had no chance to react. A bolo, a weighted cord, whipped out of the undergrowth, wrapping around its neck. Before it could even struggle, a soldier hidden in the trees yanked the rope tight, snapping its vertebrae with a sickening crunch. The remaining 3 began to fire blindly into the trees, their weapons sending searing green energy blasts through the undergrowth. Trees exploded into splinters, but they hit nothing. A faint whisper of air, a blur of motion, a sharpened dart, tipped with neurotoxin, embedded itself into the exposed joint of another Cril soldier's armor. It stumbled backward, dropping its weapon. Within moments, its muscles seized, and it collapsed. 2 left. They switched tactics, activating their personal energy shields. The air around them shimmered as an invisible barrier crackled to life. But it wouldn't save them. Ortega's men had fought in jungles all over the world. They had learned from the Viet Cong, from the rebels in South America, from every guerrilla force that had ever resisted a stronger enemy. They knew how to fight without being seen. A figure dropped from the canopy above, landing soundlessly behind one of the remaining Cril. A blade flashed, silent, precise. The Cril's head rolled to the ground before it even realized what had happened. The last soldier panicked, stepping backward, right into a tripwire. A tension-loaded spike, disguised among the trees, released with devastating force. The alien let out a strangled gasp as a sharpened wooden spear impaled it through the chest. Its armor flickered, and then its body slumped lifelessly against the jungle floor. Silence returned. Ortega rose from his cover, scanning the scene. His men materialized from the jungle like ghosts, checking bodies, retrieving weapons, erasing any sign of their presence. Ayala grinned. 5 Cril down, no casualties. Not bad for a primitive species. Ortega crouched beside the nearest body, examining the alien's weapon. It was organic, part metal, part living tissue. The grip of the rifle pulsed faintly, as if responding to his presence. He frowned. "We need to learn their tech," he muttered. "If we can turn their weapons against them, we'll have an advantage." One of his soldiers, a wiry scout named Rivera, knelt beside him. "They are bringing more patrols, Hafer. Every time we hit them, they double their forces." Ortega wiped sweat from his brow. He already knew that. The Cril were adjusting, but so was he. "They think they can overwhelm us," he said. "That just means more targets." Ayala smirked. "What's the plan?" Ortega stood, scanning the dense green horizon. His mind worked through every possible outcome. The Cril weren't used to fighting on this terrain. They relied on tech. That was their weakness. "We stop hitting small patrols," Ortega said. "We go for their command post." His men exchanged looks. It was risky, but they trusted him. Ortega looked at the jungle around him, at the towering trees and the thick vines. The Cril saw a chaotic, untamed wilderness. But to Ortega and his men, this jungle was home, and they would make sure the Cril never forgot that. The Cril respond. Hours later, deep in the Cril encampment, High Commander Varkesh studied the reports with cold fury. He had underestimated this planet's warriors. That mistake would not happen again. He turned to his subordinates. "No more patrols," he growled. "Deploy the flamethrowers. Burn the jungle to the ground." The Cril did not fear its armies, but they had begun to fear the ghosts in the trees. A low hum filled the air, growing into an ominous roar. The Cril were coming. From their vantage point high in the canopy, Ortega and his team watched as the jungle was set ablaze. Cril war machines, resembling massive metallic beetles, stomped through the undergrowth, their mechanical legs crushing vegetation with every step. Mounted on their backs were flame projectors, each spewing jets of liquid fire. The inferno spread rapidly, sending plumes of black smoke curling into the sky. The Cril had learned their lesson. They would not chase shadows through the jungle anymore. They would destroy the jungle itself. Ayala cursed under his breath as he wiped soot from his face. They are torching everything. Ortega remained silent, his mind racing. The Cril had adapted, but they had done so out of fear. They weren't trying to fight anymore. They were trying to flush them out. That meant they were winning. But fire was fire. It wouldn't matter how good they were if the whole rainforest turned to ash. Ortega knew they had to act fast. "We need to take out those fire units," he said. Ayala glanced at the machines. "How?" "Those things are armored like tanks." Rivera, the wiry scout, grinned. "Tanks don't do well in rivers." Ortega smirked. "Exactly. The river trap." The jungle was not just a battlefield. It was a weapon. Ortega's men moved swiftly, using the thick smoke as cover, while the Cril marched forward, burning everything in sight. The jungle special forces worked their way around them, heading toward the river. They reached the water just in time. The Amazon was swollen from recent rains, its current strong. Ortega ran his fingers through the water, feeling its pull. "Perfect. Set the traps," he ordered. The team worked quickly, preparing the ambush. They rigged vine-wrapped explosives to fallen logs, fashioned nets out of steel cable, and laid out sharpened stakes beneath the river's surface. The plan was simple: lure the machines in, disable them, and let the river do the rest. Minutes later, they were in position. Ortega raised his rifle and took aim at the lead war machine. He wasn't shooting to kill. He was shooting to provoke. The shot rang out, striking the beetle-like machine's leg joint. Sparks flew, but the damage was minimal. It was the noise that mattered. The Cril turned instantly, scanning the jungle. Their leader, a hulking brute covered in bio-armor, let out a guttural order. The war machine shifted course, stomping toward the river, their flame projectors hissing. "Come on," Ortega muttered. "Just a little closer." The lead machine reached the riverbank and hesitated. Its scanners were confused. The water disrupted their infrared readings. Then Ayala fired. A well-placed sniper shot struck a weak point on the closest war machine fuel tank. The reaction was immediate. Flames erupted from the puncture, and the machine staggered, belching smoke. The Cril panicked. They were accustomed to overwhelming force, not this kind of precise, calculated sabotage. The burning war machine took another step, and the ground beneath it gave way. The team had loosened the riverbank earlier, turning it into a trap. The machine toppled forward, slamming into the water. The moment it hit, Ortega detonated the explosives. A thunderous boom echoed across the jungle. Water and fire clashed, sending steam hissing into the air. The Cril war machine, designed for land warfare, was no match for the river's current. It listed sideways, its legs thrashing, before the water swallowed it whole. The second machine tried to back up, but its retreat was cut short. One of Ortega's men triggered a net trap, releasing steel cables that snapped around its legs. The machine struggled, but the cables held firm. With a final, desperate screech, it collapsed onto its side, its flame projector useless as it sputtered in the wet mud. The last machine attempted to escape, but Rivera had already swum beneath it. In one swift motion, he jammed a grenade into its leg joint and kicked off, diving back into the river. A second explosion rocked the jungle. The crippled machine shuddered, then collapsed in a heap of twisted metal. Silence fell. The flames had stopped. The jungle still burned, but the destruction had been contained. The Cril had lost again. The Cril's desperation. Back at their command post, High Commander Varkesh slammed his fist against the metal wall, denting it. Reports of failure after failure flooded in. The humans should have been easy to exterminate. Their cities had fallen in days. Their armies had been crushed. And yet, here in this forsaken jungle, a handful of them had become a nightmare. Vikesh turned to his war council. No more slow extermination. No more games. He pointed to the holographic map, where a red beacon flashed over the Amazon. Deploy the bioweapon. His officers hesitated. Even among the Cril, the Zypho spores were considered brutal. Designed to consume organic matter, the spores would wipe out everything in the jungle, including the Cril forces still trapped within. One of his officers spoke hesitantly. "High Commander, our own men." Vikesh growled. "They are expendable." There was no room for failure. Within the hour, massive pods, each filled with billions of microscopic spores, were loaded into dropships. Their mission: to erase the jungle from existence. The jungle fights back. Ortega's team had barely begun to regroup when they heard the ominous whine of something approaching. Looking up, they saw the Cril dropships descending, their hulls covered in grotesque organic sacs. Ayala swore. "What the hell are those?" Then the pods opened. A sickly green mist poured out, spreading rapidly over the jungle. Where it touched leaves, the plants withered instantly. Insects dropped dead mid-flight. The ground blackened. Ortega's heart pounded. This wasn't fire. This was something far worse. "They are trying to kill the whole damn rainforest," he growled. Rivera pulled a bandana over his face. "We can't fight that." Ortega clenched his fists. "No, they wouldn't win like this." He turned to his team. "We're not running." Ayala stared. "Hafer, we can't fight spores." "No," Ortega admitted, "but we can fight the ones deploying them." He gestured toward the dropships, which were hovering low over the jungle as they released their payload. Their weak spot was obvious. "They are close enough to board." A moment of silence. Then Ayala grinned. "Well, shit, why didn't you say so?" The jungle special forces didn't retreat. They climbed. As the spores spread, Ortega's team moved upward, scaling trees with practiced efficiency. Within minutes, they were positioned above the dropships, hidden among the canopy. The Cril didn't even see them coming. One by one, the hunters became the hunted. The war for Earth's last wilderness wasn't over. It was just getting started. Ortega crouched on a thick tree branch, staring at the massive Cril dropship hovering just beyond the canopy. The spores were spreading fast, rolling through the jungle like a toxic fog. They had minutes, maybe less, before the entire area became uninhabitable. The plan was insane. Jump onto a flying alien ship. Kill the pilots. Take control. But insanity was the only way to survive. "Move!" Ortega barked. His team didn't hesitate. Jungle Special Forces didn't freeze. They launched themselves off the branches, leaping toward the alien craft. The first few seconds were weightless terror. Then, impact. Ortega hit the ship's hull hard, his gloved hand scrambling for a grip. The surface was slick, pulsing with strange organic ridges. He slammed his combat knife into a crevice, anchoring himself. Around him, his squad did the same. Inside the ship, alarms blared. The Cril had noticed them. "Cut into the hatch," Ortega ordered. Rivera, their best tech expert, pulled out a plasma cutter and got to work. Sparks flew as he sliced through the strange metal-like flesh of the hull. Then the hatch burst open, but not from Rivera's cutter. A Cril soldier, its bioluminescent eyes glowing with rage, lunged through the opening, weapon raised. Ortega reacted on instinct. He yanked the alien forward, using its own momentum to hurl it off the ship. The Cril tumbled into the mist below, disappearing into the deadly spores. "Go! Go! Go!" Ortega shouted. His team poured into the ship's interior, weapons raised. The beast's belly. Inside, the ship felt alive. The walls pulsed as if breathing, the air thick with the scent of something acrid and fungal. The Cril didn't build ships like humans did. They grew them. Footsteps thundered ahead. Cril warriors charged down the narrow corridors, their biotech rifles glowing. Ayala fired first. His shotgun roared, tearing through the lead Cril's chest. The alien stumbled but kept coming. It took 3 more shots before it finally collapsed, its armor struggling to repair itself. Another Cril raised its rifle, too slow. Rivera slid beneath its shot, planting a knife into its leg joint. The alien howled in pain before Ortega put 2 rounds into its skull. The team pushed forward. They couldn't stop. The control chamber. They reached the cockpit, if it could even be called that. At the center of the room, embedded into the ship itself, sat the Cril pilot, its body fused with the organic controls. It hissed at them, its elongated fingers twitching. Around the room, strange, pulsating nerves connected the ship's systems to the alien's very mind. Ortega didn't hesitate. He raised his rifle and fired. The pilot shrieked, its body convulsing as bullets ripped through it. The walls around them spasmed. The ship itself was reacting. "Shit!" Ayala shouted. "It's alive!" The ship began to tilt violently. Ortega grabbed onto a fleshy ridge, his stomach lurching. Rivera ran to the controls, if they could even be called that. A series of tendrils and glowing nodes pulsed in a rhythm, reacting to the pilot's death. "This thing's on autopilot," Rivera yelled. Ortega wiped sweat from his brow. "Can you override it?" Rivera hesitated. "Maybe, but I have no idea how this thing thinks." "Figure it out," Ortega snapped. Outside, more Cril ships loomed. If they didn't get this craft under control now, they'd be shot down before they could escape. Hacking an alien mind. Rivera took a deep breath, then pulled out his knife. Instead of looking for buttons or switches, he went for the organic tendrils running through the chamber. He sliced into one. The ship lurched, nearly throwing them off their feet. Ortega's fingers dug into the ridges of the wall. "Whatever you did, don't do it again." Rivera gritted his teeth. "Trial and error, boss." He grabbed one of the glowing nodes and twisted. The ship shuddered, but instead of falling, it leveled out. Ortega turned toward the view outside. The jungle below was still burning, but the spores had slowed their spread. If they could crash this ship into the main Cril command center, they could end this. "Rivera," Ortega said, "aim us at their HQ." Rivera smirked. "Now that I can do—" The Cril counterattacked. As Rivera wrestled with the controls, a deep vibration echoed through the ship. Then, impact. The walls trembled. Ortega knew that sound. Enemy fire. The other Cril ships had noticed them. "They're shooting at us." Ayala barked. Ortega gritted his teeth. "Then we're right on schedule." Rivera fought with the controls. "I can get us to the target, but this thing isn't made for crashing. If we hit at the wrong angle, we'll be vaporized." Ortega made his decision. "We're not riding it all the way in." Ayala frowned. "What do you—" "Oh, hell no." Ortega turned to the team. "We set the ship on a collision course, then jumped before impact." Rivera sighed. "I really hate your plans, boss." But no one argued. The final leap. As the Cril HQ came into view, a massive spire, towering over the burning jungle, Ortega's team moved to the cargo bay doors. Rivera locked in the course. The ship shook violently, its structure groaning under the stress. "This thing won't last long," Rivera yelled. Ortega kicked open the doors. Wind roared around them. "On my mark." The Cril HQ loomed closer. The alien spire bristled with turrets, but they weren't firing. They still thought this was one of their own ships. "Perfect. Jump!" Ortega roared. One by one, they leapt into the sky. The Cril ship, now empty, screamed toward the HQ, engines burning at full speed. Ortega twisted in midair, watching as a collision happened. A split second of silence. Then detonation. The ship imploded, its alien structure unable to handle the force of its own reactors. The Cril command spire cracked like a dying tree, explosions ripping through its core. A wave of fire and debris erupted into the sky, chasing Ortega and his team as they plummeted toward the jungle below. The last thing Ortega saw before impact was a Cril base collapsing, flames consuming their war effort. They had done it. Then, darkness. Aftermath. Ortega woke up to the sound of rain. He groaned, rolling onto his back. His body ached, but he was alive. Above him, the Cril motherships were retreating, their forces in chaos. Their leadership was gone, their troops disorganized. Ayala limped over, grinning. We actually survived. Rivera, lying in the mud, raised a weak fist. Told you your plan was stupid. Ortega chuckled, then winced. Yeah, but it worked. The jungle was still burning. The war wasn't over. But today, Earth had won a battle the galaxy would never forget. The Cril had mocked Earth's wilderness. But in the end, it was the jungle that survived, and the ghosts within it would never stop fighting.